Hello Guyana and welcome to this week's edition of The Public Interest. I'm your host, Governmental. Thank you for joining us. As usual with us this morning is the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Brigadier David Granger. Good morning and welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Committee.
We have two journalists from the local media fraternity joining us this morning. To my extreme left is Ms. Ranetta LaFleur from the Government Information Agency and Mr. Gary Eleazar from the Guyana Times. Good morning and welcome, journalists.
Thank you for being
here. Mr. President, this morning we want to focus on improving the quality of life of Guyana's Indigenous people. Sir, just Monday gone, you addressed the National Tushaus Council Conference, which is an annual event. And at that event, you announced the setting up of a 5-member commission to basically oversee the decisions of the NTC. Sir, could you describe for us and for the ordinary Guyanese what this body intends to contribute more effectively to the development of the lives of the Indigenous people?
Well, Gomati, it's no secret that life west of the Essequibo, particularly in those 4 regions, the Barima-Waini, Region 1, Kayuni-Mazruni, Region 7, Potaro-Separuni, Region 8, and Rupununi, Region 9. Because of the distances, the poor infrastructure, and other problems, life is very difficult. We see lower performance rates at National Grade 6 examination. Delivery of healthcare is more difficult. We realize that there's more poverty because there are fewer employment opportunities. All in all, life is more difficult for the people there. Most of the people there are Indigenous people, so it's not an ethnic problem, it's really a geographical problem. My intention was simply to ensure the better delivery of public services to the hinterland communities. It was not meant to obstruct the work of the National Tushaus Council, NTC. It is just meant to make sure that because this body only meets every year, in between meetings, there is some agency, some authority, which is actually getting work done. So it is meant to assist in the delivery of public services to the hinterland communities. You must also bear in mind that there's a sort of, I would say, almost a parallel system of government. The Indigenous communities have their own councils, but there's a gap between the council and the government. Whereas on the coastline, you have neighborhood democratic councils. I mean, if you're living in a community, you can go to your NDC and complain about the garbage or something. We have RDCs. Everybody on the coast knows who the RDC is. And then you have ministries, central government. But in the Indigenous community, there's a huge gap. If you're living at Hotokwai or Hiowa, there is nobody really who is responsible for Indigenous Peoples Affairs between you and the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs or the National Tushaus Council. So my proposal was simply to expedite or facilitate the delivery of services to the people. It was not an obstruction, it is not an obstacle, it is not taking away from the NTC or the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs. It's a new proposal. And that is my intention. Nobody can doubt that the quality of life of the people living in the hinterland is, on average, lower. The quality of education is lower. The quality of public health is lower. That is the purpose of my intervention.
Thank you, sir. Gary, you can now pose your question on the topic.
Well, sir, just a quick follow-up on what you would have said. I'm wondering, over the years, we would have seen a number of groupings coming out to represent the interest of Amerindians, and oftentimes they're met with resistance because they seem to want to undermine another grouping. Isn't there any mechanism in any of the ministries that we could have just expanded on rather than creating something new?
Well, I'm creating something new, but within the ministry. You may be referring, of course, to non-governmental organizations, Amerindian People's Association, TAMOG, and so on. These are very useful because they're in touch with the communities, but by definition, they're non-governmental. The functions that I am most concerned about are governmental functions. getting girls, particularly underage girls who are pregnant, into hospitals, making sure that people don't have to go across the border to Brazil for medical treatment, ensuring that the quality of education, when we have 90% people in hinterland not qualifying in English or mathematics at National Grade 6 examination, things like this I want to facilitate, but NGOs can't do that. NGOs tend to look after rights, representation, but I look after services.
In terms of the level of resources you would plan to put behind this, how do you envision this proceeding? I mean, resources are scarce right now. What level of resources do you see being put behind this?
At present, I don't envisage that there is necessarily going to be an increase in resources. What I envisage is that there's going to be greater efficiency in delivery. Sometimes we know that in the past, politicians have gone into communities and given out solar panels, sewing machines, outboard engines. But 2 years later, these things have disappeared. We want to ensure that materials that are provided, training that is provided, will actually have a long-term impact on those communities. And they're not regarded as sort of electoral expedience that people want to get a vote, they give some gifts, but we want to make sure there's long-term development. For example, during El Nino, there were serious problems with water. Right now, there's serious problems with electricity. So the children who are studying for exams, when they go home at evening, they should get proper light. Giving them a little panel is not going to solve, because sometimes the radiance of the light is inadequate for studying. So NGOs cannot do that. We want to ensure that the level of development of indigenous communities moves more rapidly to be on par with that of coastland communities.
Ranetta.
Mr. President, as we seek to improve the quality of life for Guyana's indigenous people, one of the major issues that continue to be a burden for the indigenous people is ownership of their land. The previous administration, they took years to address this issue. And even so, towards the end of that administration, officials were complaining that several hinterland communities were issued land titles that were false. So I just want to know, how do you intend to address this issue? Or how is your administration addressing these issues? What actions will be taken? And since it is a burden for the indigenous people, will it be prioritized?
It is a priority. I would just like to remind you that since 1966, the government of the day established something called the Amerindian Lands Commission under Mr. Patrick Fort. And it was because of that commission that indigenous people were given the lands in the first instance. So what you're complaining about is something that's taken 50 years and is still incomplete. However, in my own interaction with indigenous people in the 10 regions, because there are indigenous people in all of the regions, some dissatisfaction has arisen with the lands that have been allocated. It's not as they got no lands at all, but dissatisfaction has been expressed. And my intention is to reestablish a form of Indigenous Peoples Lands Commission. This is what I've committed to, so that demarcation could be done, to the satisfaction of both sides. I do not feel that it is fair for us to go further into the future without dealing with the lands issue. Land is life for the indigenous people. They are not interested in house lots. They want land to hunt, they want land to farm, they want land to fish, they want land to cut timber for materials. So you can't give them a house lot. We have to deal with this issue once and for all. And the problem is that, particularly because of mining and, of course, the threat of water pollution, some people have tried to alter the boundaries. So you really need a commission, because when one community tries to alter its boundaries, sometimes intrudes on another community. So it is not something that could be embarked on unilaterally. And this is my commitment to the indigenous people, and it's going to happen.
Gary.
Sir, you're being accused, the land titling, you stress the importance of land titling and demarcation, but your administration is also being accused of bringing this process almost to a halt. The opposition have accused you of, well, not you, the administration of firing the entire land titling unit. Only one title, I think, was given out in the past year, and the entire process has slowed to an almost halt. I'm wondering, how do you bring the two together? Your level of importance you put on this, yet the actual work being done is not there.
Yeah, well, as I explained just now, the intention is to establish a new lands commission, and that is going to be the agency that will authorize the demarcation and speed up the process. So that is the reason why it has slowed, because a new, entirely new commission is going to come into being. You would be surprised at the number of issues. It is not an isolated matter. Almost every community I've been into complained about land demarcation.
When could we see this new commission?
I'm aiming at 31st of December.
Ranetta.
Mr. President, moving forward, during the NTC, it was advocated that the Amerindian language be incorporated in the school curriculum. Do you support this initiative, and how feasible is it?
The Constitution supports the right of Indigenous people to use and to be educated in their own language. And it is sensible because sometimes you have doctors or technical officers going into communities who cannot communicate in the first language of the residents themselves. Don't forget, many Americans my age don't speak English as their first language. They prefer to communicate in their own language. And even in areas like medicine, if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. And there have been problems of miscommunication. Even when I used to campaign, I would try to go with a native speaker, somebody who speaks the language, and to interpret for me, although many of them would understand English. When I use an interpreter, I think it's much more effective. So there is an issue. And once the language is lost, a lot of the nuance, a lot of the cultural elements are also lost. So it's an interest of the country to preserve the language. And those of you who were present last evening at the interfaith service would know that most of the prayers from the Indigenous community were said in the native languages. I've been to some political rallies, and people have come up to give greetings, and the entire greeting was in Arikuna or Akawayo. So we need to respect that. Certainly for public servants going in to serve in Indigenous areas, they need to understand the language. But don't forget, there are 9 different communities. So it's not just a question of coastland versus interior hinterland. It's also a question sometimes somebody from Maruka, and Amerindian from Maruka may not understand somebody from Massiconeri, or somebody from Haiwa may not understand somebody from Karasabai. So there are internal problems as well. It is complicated, and dealing with 9 languages is going to be problematic, but it is a right, and we will continue to support the Indigenous peoples, producing dictionaries, producing vocab books, and ensuring that it is taught to the children in those communities. And all of us need to understand a bit of some of the Indigenous words that we need for engagement in these communities.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we do want to move on from the topic at this point. And I'll take you back to last Thursday when you visited the Tukama training area for exercise Home Guard, which was a closing exercise basically put on by the Guyana Defense Force. Sir, how do you see these activities, such as exercise Home Guard? How do you think, what importance do you think it has to the average Guyanese, and why they should look to these exercises?
Well, national defense is the concern of every citizen. Quite unfortunately, in Guyana's case, we became independent in 1966. We entered the Geneva Agreement, and up to the present time, Venezuela, which occupied Ancoco Island in 1966, has never surrendered. We've never been able to get it back. Right now, Venezuela is behaving in a hostile manner. It still continues to publish maps which show the entire Essequibo, 4 regions, constituting over 2/3 of Guyana's territory as part of Venezuela. So Home Guard is an exercise which Guyanese should understand, make sure that the Defense Force is in a state of constant preparation for any intrusion into our territory or any threat to our territorial integrity. I see it as a very important national event. It is not sending a warning to the neighbors, but it is giving a reassurance to Guyanese that we are not sitting on our hands, we're not sleeping, and that their rights are going to be protected. In the western Essequibo, for example, in Region 7, Cuyuni-Mazruni, there is a border with Venezuela, Cuyuni River and the Venamu River, and we have had several intrusions by rogue Venezuelans. A couple of months ago, 2 months ago, there was a shooting incident at Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. And we need to continue to demonstrate that we are prepared to prevent any intrusion and to protect our citizens. So that is the importance of Home Guard. It is everybody's concern. Again, on the eastern frontier, we are ready to ensure that there is no intrusion into our territory. And we can rest assured that the Guyana Defense Force is trained and ready to protect our national interests. That's the importance of Home Guard.
Thank you, sir. Janice, you can now pose your questions off of the topic.
Go ahead. Mr. President, you would have announced that the 2017 budget would be read on December 5th.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. And Minister of Finance, Winston Jordan, he would have said that 50% of the budget has not been spent. What would you say to critics who are saying that we have not spent 2016 budget to boost the economy, but we're trying to present 2017 budget?
Well, I would say that they ought not to be afraid that there's been any malpractice. The explanations are quite simple. For one, we do not have ministerial planning units. So many ministers who took over the ministries last year were not receiving the quality of advice about plans that we feel now they deserve to have. So one decision that we've taken is to establish ministerial planning units so that not only are plans made, but expenditure which matches those plans would be programmed so we don't face a bottleneck. The second issue is the question of the ability of the government to process all of the tenders. That is, when works have to be done, services have to be provided, there is a process of applying to the National Tender Board. And there is a bottleneck. There are just too many requests for that board to handle, and we need to have maybe a bigger board, or maybe the board needs to sit more frequently, or day and night, like a night court. But those are the two main problems: the absence of planning and the capability and capacity of the tender process. Third, I would admit that there is an attitude problem too. We need to, and that is going to be corrected by presenting the budget in the year prior to the financial year, which should become operable, which means that no permanent secretary, who is the accounting officer of each ministry, no permanent secretary will be able to say by 1st of January next year that he or she does not know. So lack of planning, lack of preparedness will not be an excuse, because they will know in December what their allocations are, and we expect that 2017 is going to be much better financially. So I do not disagree with the Minister of Finance, but those three changes have to be put in place. One, the planning unit. Two, the changes in the procurement, in the tender board process. And three, the permanent secretaries have to be fully seized of the need to put those programs into effect earlier in the year. If you present a budget in March, people don't get going till July. And next thing you know, between July and September, which is where we are now, there is a huge bottleneck of people making requests for services and supplies. The result is that by November, December, money still would not have been spent. But we'll correct that next year. We know there's a fault. And we'll correct it.
Gary.
Sorry, if I could, a quick follow-up on the planning unit. You're being accused of not presenting a holistic national development plan, something that we could scrutinize. And the question is now being asked, how would these planning units operate outside of any such development plans? I'm just trying to get some clarity on that from you.
Well, find out who made that accusation and ask him if he ever had a plan.
Well,
there have been two plans in Guyana's history. One is from 1968 to 1972. That plan was written by Sir Arthur Lewis. The second plan was written by Mr. Kenneth King from 1972 to 1976. There have been no other plans.
So
those are the only two plans, national development plans, which have ever been written in the economic history of Guyana. What we have are some poverty sector reduction, low carbon strategy, and sectoral strategies. There is no single plan. It would take us about 18 months to 2 years to write a new plan, and we are working on that. So what we're saying is that internally within the ministries, they are going to have plans so that they come with those plans to cabinet approves those plans, but it will take time before those sectoral or ministerial plans become national plans. So that is the long and short of it. You must ask him, next time you see him, ask him, where's your plan?
I will.
Renetta.
Mr. President, I just want to talk about the salary increase. Teachers and police and public servants, were promised a decent salary. Those are the criticism, or that is the criticism rather. But then they're saying that this final salary offered is an injustice to them. What is your response to that?
Well, for one, it's not unjust. It is perhaps, I would say, what is affordable at present. We must admit that when we went into office in May last year, we did not quite anticipate the volume of indebtedness, or the size of indebtedness of the Guyana Sugar Corporation. We've been bailing out the Guyana Sugar Corporation with $10 billion a year. We've also had problems in, as you know, there's been a fall in commodity prices worldwide, in bauxite, gold, timber, and these have affected our revenues. We've also not been able to find sufficient funding for other agencies, the social agencies like University of Guyana and the school system, and also for the health services. And we did try to move the old age pensions up a bit, but the social sector has taken quite a bit of our money. So I'm not saying that the public servants do not deserve more, but we did everything that is possible. We entered into negotiations in good faith, and we haven't discontinued negotiation, but that is the final offer we put on the table, because we have to prepare next year's budget. We have to tidy up this business before the last quarter, and we continue to engage with the Guyana Public Service. You and I personally met Mr. Patrick Yard, and there are other initiatives that will be put on the table. But we want an efficient public service, and we're going to continue to engage the union.
Should the General Council refuse the final offer, are you prepared to make an arbitrary award?
The award that we have proposed is as much as we can do as of the 1st of September. And we intend to proceed with that. We would like to encourage the union to remain engaged with the government negotiators because we have to look at 2017, and as I said, there are going to be other elements on the table, not only salary, but there are other things that the union requested of us. So we have not discontinued talks, but that is our latest financial offer. And we are prepared to proceed in that business, but we would like to continue to speak with the union for the rest of this year and ensure that we have an outcome in 2017 which is satisfactory to both sides.
Ranetta?
There are reports that faith and hope in this coalition government is diminishing, right? Persons are saying that the government has deceived the economy, meaning that the economy is not progressing well, or they haven't seen much progress so far, and youths were also deceived. Mr. President, how would you respond to this?
Well, we're living in a real world, and in the first instance, as far as the economy is concerned, I've said before that our economy was excessively dependent on certain primary products, and as long as we remain dependent on those products, we'll be subject to the rise and fall, the ups and downs of commodity markets. We sell sugar in the international market, we sell bauxite in the international market, we sell gold in the international market, timber in the international market. And when prices fall, the economy will suffer, revenue will suffer. And this is exactly what happened in 2015. We don't control gold prices, we don't control the prices that people pay for bauxite. And everyone knows that China suffered some setbacks, and there are other major economies which consume those raw materials which suffered setbacks. And if demand in China slackens or is reduced, demand for timber from Guyana or bauxite from Guyana will slacken. The two big bauxite companies are Russian and Chinese. So that has been a fact. Similarly, gold is now recovering. But as long as Guyana's economy remains based on what they call the Six Sisters, we will be subject to that. It's harmful to our economy. As far as youth are concerned, we haven't deceived anybody. We continue to explore opportunities and avenues and initiatives for youth employment. Quite recently, I launched a SLED initiative. Or in fact, I graduated students from the SLED initiative. And people should see what young, entrepreneurial, educated people are doing for themselves. Government accepts its responsibility to go out there and help to find jobs and maybe provide finance as we do in LEN. But we must work together with the private sector. We must work together with young people to ensure that they get the quality of education that they need to go into these jobs too. So we haven't abandoned or deceived anybody. And a lot of young people can go out there and testify that the government of Guyana is helping them to find work. But I must ask young people to stay in school. It's no point having 4,000 dropouts every year, and people come out and they can't read, write, count, or spell properly. Stay in school, graduate, and it will be easier for you to get jobs. We would like to encourage agro-processing. We would like to encourage young people to go into more cottage industries, manufacturing, and I expect that things will get better. But people cannot expect to stay out of school and still be attractive employees to the business places. Business people want to make use of these young employment opportunities. Investors coming into the country would like to be able to conduct exams to see young people who can go and work with those enterprises. But young people must stay in school and take and ensure that they get the type of education that would make it easier for them to find employment or self-employment. But the government hasn't abandoned or deceived anybody.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the last question that we want to ask before we wrap up this week's edition is, what are some of your government's plans for economic diversification?
Basically, the plans are in the economic field. The plans are in the economic field, as the word suggests. and it's largely in agriculture. Recently, I was at Parika, and we saw that there's a demand for new commodities, new crops. We are engaging more forcefully with the Eastern Caribbean. These people need agricultural products, and we're looking at things like fruit juices. Even our education system, our defense force, last week we were at Home Guard. We want to see when troops go on exercise, they're using agricultural products from Guyana. So we feel that there's a wide area for diversification, particularly in agro-processing, producing chips, juices, milk products, cheese, biscuits, and so on. And we believe that much of what could be produced in Guyana could be exported to the Eastern Caribbean, which has a very healthy hospitality industry. There are many hotels there which can make use of our avocado pears and our juices and fish and other products. So really it is in the agricultural field that we see the economy being diversified, particularly in agro-processing. There's a facility at Parika which is hardly used. So it's a question of stimulating the enterprise. That is why I was so heartened by what I saw at the SLED exhibition last week.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, journalist. That has brought us to the end of this week's edition of The Public Interest. Do join us next time. Thank you. Goodbye.